Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The President of the United States, late in the news cycle, an announcement to the United States and to the world that the IRS, acting director of the IRS, has resigned, has been fired. This because of ongoing revelations in the IRS scandal. At the same time, the Attorney General testifying before Congress, making remarks about the AP investigation by the Department of Justice with regard to a leak. The Department of Justice at this point is saying what we did was legal. We needed to do this to seal a national security leak. At the same time, within moments of the White House press conference in the East Room of the White House, 100 pages of email documents from the White House, the National Security Council, the CIA, and the State Department, mostly about September 14th, 2012, about the incident of September 11th, 2012, and the attack in Benghazi leading up to the ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice's remarks to the nation on Sunday, the 16th of September. All those documents arrived at the feet of the press corps having to deal with the president's announcement of the firing of the chief executive of the IRS, acting chief executive, no longer acting as of June. Also late in the news cycle, CNN is reporting that there are two rogue employees in Cincinnati who've been singled out as the cause of this scandal for the IRS. The president is alarmed. The White House is in full offense right now, getting documents out, making statements. The president will have a press conference within these next hours to answer questions. I have a question for everyone on the AP story, and I'm joined now momentarily by a member of Congress, Devin Nunes of California delegation. Devin, a very good evening to you. The revelation from the Department of Justice about the dragnet, it included the fact that there were 20 phone lines that were watched, or information from those phone lines were part of the investigation. One of those phone lines was in the gallery of the House of Representatives. What does that mean about who was on that phone? And if you were in the House of Representatives, what does that mean for you? Good evening, Congressman.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. Essentially, what it means is I think there's a real issue here about the separation of powers between the legislative branch and the executive branch. The reporters that are in the House gallery are reporting on members of Congress. So a lot of the phone records that the reporters would be talking to would be members of Congress. And I just can't understand why the mainstream media, members of Congress, and others are not paying attention to this. This means essentially that the executive branch was spying on us, on me, on all of my colleagues. And to me, this is, I don't know why people are not focusing on this.
Well, I'm focusing right now. I want to understand how it goes, Devin. You're in the Cloak room, and that's a private area for members of Congress, and you have a conversation with a member of the AP. He calls you or you call him. How does it happen?
It could happen either way, right? I could call from my office. I could call from the Cloak room. You call to the House gallery. You talk to the reporter.
And that call, according to what we know so far about the dragnet from Department of Justice, that call was recorded. Was the contents of that call or just your phone number?
Well, all we know now, and I say this, and I'm anxious to get more information, is that they have the phone records. So they would know. For example, I don't talk to the AP very often, but if I called the AP from my office or from the Cloak room, they would know that a call came from there. They would know that if the AP reporter called my cell phone, they would know if an AP reporter called anyone in the United States. But the problem is not that there was a investigation. The issue here is a separation of powers. That essentially they got phone records from the House of Representatives. They have to know that AP reporters sitting in the House of Representatives are reporting on members of Congress. Plain and simple. And
when the members of the executive, the Department of Justice is the executive, when they encroach upon the legislature, which is what you are in the House of Representatives, do they need special permission? Do they have to ask the Speaker's permission? Can the FBI just crowd in there and look over your office, or do they have to back off?
John, it's almost unprecedented, right? I mean, this is like one of the major tenets of our Constitution.
Separation of powers.
I mean, it's incredible. So when I don't know how this is rectified, but I think the Speaker of the House said it right. they better have a darn good reason for doing this.
Yes, and we'll wait for darn good reasons. Devin Nunes is a member of the California delegation, and this detail seems sort of gigantic, and we'll look more of it. Of course, we've been overwhelmed by scandals and accusations and discoveries these last days. Thank you very much, Congressman. I turn now to one of those scandals because 100 pages of email documents 24 hours ago, my friend Larry Johnson of NoQuarter and I said, well, we won't speak again till Thursday because we have to believe the IRS will take precedence and we'll back off and we'll bow to the hotter scandal for the moment and Benghazi will come back. Larry, a very good evening to you. 100 pages, and I've had a chance to look what I can at going through them on Twitter. People have been quoting from the 100 pages. And what jumps out at me, Larry, is very clearly the NSC, the White House, the political officers and the Oval Office in the White House, the State Department, and the CIA took out the word Al-Qaeda. Larry, doesn't that seem significant? Doesn't that seem an effort to deceive the American people to take the word Al-Qaeda out of the attack in Benghazi? Good evening to you.
Hi, John. And yes, it was not the judgment of the intelligence community that was presented in those talking points at the end of the day. It was the political judgment of State Department and with the cooperation of the National Security Staff, John Brennan in particular, that excised that material. Those talking points are really damning. If you follow them through, they start off at CIA and going through the coordination process internally and then through the coordination process within the rest of the intelligence community. But throughout that process, the CIA is dealing with the National Security Staff, with John Brennan and his lackeys.
Mr. Donilon and Mr. McDonough at National Security, Tommy Vietor, and John Brennan at the time was counterterrorism czar, all working together for national security.
Correct. And then as it progresses, it's the National Security Council says, we better bring State Department into this. So when they insert State Department into it, then states start saying, oh, wait a second, we can't have members of Congress knowing that because then they will go out and say things like Al-Qaeda was involved and that's going to look bad for us. What's also striking when you go through all the material, at no point throughout that material until the very end when they're talking to the UN does the story of using the videotape as an explanation emerge. It is not present in any of the CIA talking points.
I noticed that, Larry. They talked about the demonstration in Cairo. They did not mention a video. That was repeated again and again.
Completely absent. So we need to know, who was it that actually inserted the video? We know it was not the intelligence community.
Right.
So was it State Department, or was it the National Security Council, or was it Susan Rice at the UN? Those are the only three possibilities.
Or are there documents we haven't seen yet? This is 100 pages, but there could have been other documents in that 4 or 5 or 6 day period. We don't know.
But I do know the process. Having written these kinds of papers from the standpoint of a CIA analyst and produced this, once the intelligence community provides its judgments, the policymakers are free really to do what they want, but they can't go out and say, as this administration has bald-faced lied, insisting that what their talking points were presenting was the judgment of the intelligence community. That's a lie. That's simply not true.
There's more that's missing than just Al-Qaeda. There are, in fact, missing parts about the background of the attack in Benghazi, about the security of the residents, and about and I mentioned, Larry, what's missing for me also. We do not see in this debate about the editing, we do not see who it was or why there was no rescue effort. That's not in these talking points. They're ignoring that whole part of the drama.
That was completely irrelevant. They were hoping that nobody would focus on that, and it was just sheer bad luck for those poor people caught out there. So that's really outside the scope of these talking points, and that was not a judgment the intel community was asked to make, nor were they competent to make that, because those were decisions that would have taken place within the Department of Defense through the military chain of command, and it would have been with State Department's cooperation of calling for that assistance, which they clearly did not do that night, as we know from the testimony of Mark Thompson, who was one of the whistleblowers last week.
Al-Qaeda became extremists. And that was a judgment of this process. It's 100 pages. There's a lot to look. But can you see at any moment, Larry, any other reason to do it except for political? Is there any?
No, there is no other. They tried to make the case, well, we better defer to the FBI because the FBI doesn't want anyone identified or we can't speculate. Except the intelligence community made it very clear. We know, the language they used was, we know that Al-Qaeda elements were involved.
Right.
Not Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, not AQIM, but Al-Qaeda.
Right. They say at one point it's not AQIM, it's Al-Qaeda itself.
Right, and I know how they know that, but it gets into intelligence methods.
And they saw this at the NSC, they saw it at the CIA, at State, they saw it at the White House, and they went through this elaborate process to eliminate Al-Qaeda, a reference to Al-Qaeda. Everything else actually was camouflage and bric-a-brac. You get Al-Qaeda out of there, you can say anything.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if they're saying, well, we have to eliminate Al-Qaeda because that will reveal an intelligence source and method, but you could identify Al-Qaeda without having to identify exactly how you determine that. But the judgment of the intelligence community on this was unambiguous, and I must tell you, it's a rare moment as an intel analyst where you get to say something so definitive that we know that it was Al-Qaeda. So that, the Jay Carney's facade that has crumbled, completely, that this was just some minor changes and they just changed special consulate to special mission. It's been exposed as a complete, utter fabrication.
The editorial pages and the news reporting right now about the document dump this afternoon at the White House, there will be more details in that document dump. There are more pages. There's more information. There's much more. Remember, 48 hours ago, the President of the United States and the leader of the Senate used the word sideshow with regard Benghazi. This sideshow is very well documented. Larry Johnson of NoQuarter, and I thank Congressman Devin Nunes for pointing to the fact, unanswered yet, about that House of Representatives gallery phone line for the AP. Did it connect to members of Congress? Did that mean that separation of powers was trampled upon by the Department of Justice? I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.